Welcome to Amazon Legends, where we have real stories about making it big on Amazon. Our guests are CEOs of large companies and entrepreneurs who became power sellers, also providers specializing in helping sellers, aggregators that acquire sellers, and former Amazonians will give us an insight from behind the scenes. Here is your host, Nick Urison.
Welcome to another episode of Amazon Legends. My next guest today spent over a decade in digital advertising, working with Fortune 500 companies like Mercedes and Sony and others. And today he's the founding partner of Southcall, which is an e-commerce focused incubator and an exit accelerator. And when he's not working, he's into fitness, lifting weights, and also his main occupation being the father of a 1-year-old boy. So with that, everybody, meet my guest, Yoni Kosminski. Welcome to the show, Yoni.
Nick, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, being a father is the first job, right? So
it's more of a full-time job than I had anticipated. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's why women don't get enough credit, and they get not happy when you don't acknowledge what they do. It's a full-time job.
Well, for all the women and mothers listening out there today, all I can say is you're all my heroes, because if it was up to men, one generation, maybe two, humanity's dying out. We ain't coping.
Exactly. So, Yoni, you work with a lot of businesses, Amazon sellers, who are looking to make it big, right? So they're looking to build a company that is worth something, so that somebody one day writes a check. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So that's what you do all day. You help people grow their operation in a meaningful way and then exit in a lucrative way. So that's what you do. So you understand the business. Now, the old business model, old being about a year old, I guess, was get a good idea, do your research, create a product under your own private label, grow revenues, and sell. So that era is over. Because, I mean, I don't want to say over, it's not as active anymore, and it's not as easy. So tell us some of your recommendations for these Amazon sellers who are still bringing sales, still doing, because entrepreneurs don't stop. What are some of your recommendations to build their business?
So before I dive in there, I'll just say, while I wouldn't say it's necessarily dead. I think what you're really talking about now is that where you need to take your business to is just a different level, and it requires more consideration and more thought and more time and more investment. And coming to your question, what should you be doing when it comes to preparing that business? And I'm not talking about just preparing it for exit. I'm talking about actually building and growing it to a meaningful number. You know, I'm talking about 8-figure exits here and things that are life-changing. You know, it's really about diversification. It's about building a real brand. So like you really clearly pointed, Nick, it's not about just finding something on AliExpress and slapping a sticker on it and growing it to, you know, $1 million in revenue and selling it. It's about creating real differentiation in that brand and having something that you can stand behind. So also IP is going to be really important in these types of conversations.
So as far as I always like to dissect things so that we can take on smaller pieces rather than one big humongous piece. So what is the overall approach here, if we can put it into small buckets of, if you like, objectives?
When we talk about scaling a business or preparing or getting it to a meaningful number and getting ready for exit, is that the question?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it breaks down into many different areas, right? It's a hard one to chew all at once. But what I would say is that the first thing that you'd look at is, what does a prospective buyer look like? You know, is it a private equity buyer? Is it a strategic? Is it one of the aggregators that are still buying? What are they looking for and what is important to them, and work backwards from there. So some of the things or some of the high level topics, and then Nick, maybe we can dive in and start talking about them. But I touched on diversification. So that means, not having, as we go larger and we start to try and hit, revenue numbers of 10 plus million, I would say one of the big shifts that we've seen over the course of the last 12 to 24 months is that getting to a $5 million revenue, million EBITDA, having many bidders, those days, at least in the current climate, and personally, I don't really see it changing significantly at that level. They're somewhat behind us. And so it's, how do I actually take it to 10, 15, $20 million? And what is that going to take? So coming back to it, building brand, really important. So having something that is identifiably yours and something that has clear differentiation is going to be one key pillar. Having a degree of diversification from a channel perspective. So not just selling on Amazon. It used to be, for a lot of these aggregators, one SKU, dump all of your investment into this one SKU, or grow it really, really large. And on the back of that, we'll buy it because it's perceivably easier to operate. Now, when we talk about the buyers of today, they're more sophisticated. They're looking for things that actually have capabilities and resources that they can then plug into. So that diversification around multiple channels, whether it's, Amazon and having a D2C Shopify component to it and having a degree in there, or moving to brick and mortar retail or a wholesale channel, or starting to have areas of diversification. Also, when we talk about multi-country, so not just Amazon US, while it might be the biggest market, the US, if you can expand into the UK and the EU and other geographies that make sense, that also starts to become increasingly more valuable. I don't want to keep going on a rant here, Nick. I'm just being mindful. I'll pause, because if you let me, I'll just go all day and tell you all the things that you need to be doing. This, like you said, this is what I do.
Yeah, I just want to get the big picture in terms of the approach. So what I heard you say is, don't just focus on one single SKU to achieve X number of dollars in revenues. That's not enough. You need to demonstrate your success in a diverse way in terms of channels and also your products. So that way there is something. So I want to set our conversation up a little bit for our listeners so that they understand what they can take away from this conversation. So, I do, and listeners know, I repeat all the time, I'm big into scuba diving. So in scuba diving, we have a saying, we say, plan the dive, dive the plan. So that way, you can come back without any problems and then keep diving a long time. So business is no different. So you have to have a plan. What is a strategic plan look like is the first piece. So you have to sit down and make a plan in terms of what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, and then what is your expected outcome. So first of all, is that the right approach that you will take in making that plan?
In short, yes. That's exactly, I would say, with all of this comes very meticulous planning. And if you don't actually work through and have clarity on what your objective is and what your metrics are when you want to exit your business, then what gets measured gets managed. And if you're not measuring these key details, then you're not really understanding where you're going. And so, yeah, I would agree. And I can definitely elaborate on all of this and share with you sort of how we approach that planning stage.
Yeah, I mean, you just said the word that I like very much, measuring, which gives you data. So in this conversation, that's what I want to do with you, so that let's dissect what that strategic growth plan looks like. What is it that you are doing that is supposed to deliver the kind of result that is acceptable? So what are those metrics or what are ways for you to assess the success that you are getting? So I heard you mention diversification a couple of times. So are you talking about diversification of your products or diversification of channels, or is there more?
Yeah, so I was talking specifically in that instance around channels, but product is a really important one. And I'm actually going to follow your lead here, Nick. So I'm just going to take you guys through, and Nick, jump in at any point that you feel makes sense. But I'm just going to walk you through now, like how we approach when we invest, when we put $1 million to $5 million into a brand, and we're happy to work with the founder and we're taking them through this growth roadmap. What do we actually do, and how do we approach this process? So how we look at it is, first and foremost, to your point, we define those metrics at what do we expect 2 years out in terms of revenue, in terms of number of products, both child and parent. If we're talking about Amazon specifically, we talk about the distribution or the diversification. So which channels are we going to be selling on? And really importantly, what is that EBITDA or what is that operating margin? And those, I would say, are like the 4 critical guiding principles as to what we're driving towards. So I'll stop there for a second, because it breaks down into the 5 key drivers that we like to dive into.
Yeah. So number of products, channels you're selling through, revenue, and EBITDA.
Yep. Those are the main focal points. Like I would say, if you are familiar with EOS and the concept of rocks that was actually created by Stephen R. Covey, where those are the big objectives that you're driving toward when you set them out. And then all of the sand and pebbles and water and everything else that you put inside of this cup that you're driving toward should flow through and be what actually guides the build out of the entire operation up until that point where you exit the business.
Okay, cool. So let's look at each one of those. So number of products is the first one that you mentioned. Would you, between the number of products and number of channels, which one is more important? Someone already has one product.
I don't think that there's like a uniform cookie cutter approach that you can take in terms of how many products is right. Coming back to it, you're always looking at what does the prospective buyer in that category look for, and what's the value that they see in the business they're acquiring. What I would say is how we actually approach hitting those goals, knowing who the buying audience is. Just remembering, like, one of the partners in this joint venture is an investment bank who sold over $1 billion in transaction value. They know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know exactly what every buyer is looking for. I know that they do, and they bring that to the table. But what I bring to the table, and I think what's most relevant, or what I would rather say, like what our portion of this is, well, how do we actually get to hitting those metrics, and what does that look like? And we break down those 4 objectives into 5 key areas and categories. And I think these are the pillars that you build upon in order for you to actually achieve those success metrics. And just to sort of, spout them off to you, we're talking, the way we break it down is product, brand, marketing, operations, and general business management. And so those are the 5 categories that we are effectively planning out. And what we're doing is we're building 3-month cadences of what are we going to hit in every quarter up until the point that we exit, strategically reverse engineering. What are the things that are going to take more time versus less time? What are the things that, with the money that's been invested, that we want to spend early, that's going to yield the highest revenue growth in the early stages, that will allow us to then be more efficient as we're bringing it to exit, and be really, really intelligent as to what does the business need to look like at that specific point in time 2 years on, and work backwards. So coming back to it, and I'd say, Nick, like, please feel free to jump in at any time.
Yeah. So let's go over those 5. So each and every one of those 4 key areas, you break it down into product, brand, marketing, operations, and general business management.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. So, they say that, whatever you hear, you remember only 60% of it after an hour. And that's if you write it down. So, so if you kind of, I learned over the years that if you repeat it, it sticks with you. So, okay. So those 5 things, but they are subsets of the 4 areas right at the top level, which was the product. Again, there was product, right?
Yep.
And then there was the top line.
Revenue. Yep.
Top line and EBITDA, and there was one more there, diversification.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, cool. So product, diversification, top line, revenue, and EBITDA breaks down into, again, products. So let's now take each one. I don't know if we can cover all 4, but we'll get an idea. So let's break down each one of those. And another thing that I heard you mention, which is very important, is you create 3-month cadences to execute in each one of those 5 areas, right? We may have to do another episode to cover this whole curriculum, because you're giving us the curriculum.
Yep.
Let's start the first one, product. And then you break that down into 5, and then give us an example of the cadences.
Yeah. So to sort of take it a step further, or to frame it for the audience very clearly. So we have our metrics that we want to achieve on exit, and that's what we set in, relative stone. And then on the back of that, these 5 categories, from product to brand management, each one of them are the key topics and areas inside of our business that we're looking to achieve over the course of that 2-year journey. And so to start with product, and like I called out, those 3-month cycles, we might say, right, we know when it comes to product development takes time. Sourcing, identifying the right partner, testing and QA, packaging, design, like that is a long-winded process. So we might say, right, what we want to do in the first 3 months of our relationship together is we want to effectively identify 15 products that we want to bring to market. And so a large portion of the product component is starting at that point. But we might also say, you know what, though, we want to make sure patents can take time to file, and it might, and IP and everything that relates to the legalities around it. And, I'm not an expert in the field, but if things are live online for extended periods before you actually get a patent, then sometimes they can be void. So we'll make these decisions and say, these are some of the critical things and the drivers that we need to handle right now. Whereas we might come to channel expansion when we talk about the marketing component of the brand. How do we move on to the next area and say, you know what, we've got a D2C store. It just needs to be optimized. We need to push go on the media buying component of it. And, we have the audiences and the lists, and we know what we're doing, but that's not the most pressing for right now. And so we'll actually work backwards to figure out where does that make sense. So what we're actually doing is we're plotting out every single activity and an element that we want to achieve over the 2-year period into these 3-month cadences, or these 3-month increments. And on the back of that, we're actually working toward what we would define as the growth or exit roadmap.
Yeah. So here, the focus is on, obviously, diversification of your product pool, and then also securing your intellectual property, and at the same time creating somewhat of a following for it through the marketing efforts, right? That's where the focus is.
Yeah, again, like it would differ from brand to brand. Like I'm just throwing out, just for anyone listening, like I don't want you to say like, this is how we approach it. Like it's very different for every brand that we're invested in right now. But the key point is that you work through. So brand, for example, so product might be things like reducing the cost of goods sold and sourcing and finding a better manufacturer for your product, not necessarily cheaper. You might want to go more upmarket because you can derive a higher value. So you'd plot it out over the course of that 2-year journey in those 3-month increments, and then you would move on to brand. So brand might be elements like having a very clear brand identity or a brand refresh, or having a degree of a loyalty program or, strategies on how we can actually, increase that LTV, lifetime total value of a customer who is already inside of it, and how do we tie in the products that we plan to bring to market that are aligned with our brand to then actually start to grow market share, not just with our existing brand evangelists, but also people beyond and things like that. So those might be the areas inside a brand, for example.
Okay. All right. And then let's move on to the out of the 5. So we kind of covered product and brand. Let's move on to the next one. So what would be your approach there?
So for marketing, we'd be looking at things, again, depending on where the channel is, it would still be the same, whether it is just D2C or Amazon, but, things like conversion rate optimization, optimizing our media spend, looking at where our traffic is coming from, like any part of the digital marketing mix, exploring, this is where that D2C expansion and the channels that we're focused on might come into the equation. What identifying the right markets to grow into, and effectively expanding, if you're just in Amazon or Amazon US, expansion to Canada and other markets and things that are low hanging fruit. So those would be the things that we look at inside of the marketing of the brand itself. And I'm not talking about the marketing of it when we look to take it to exit. That's a thing outside of the business owner's wheelhouse.
So Yoni, as far as the value of it, imagine a company that's doing well on Amazon, and now they are at the crossroads, because as you know, you can't go into multiple different directions at the same time. So you have to focus and build one channel at a time. So what is a higher value? Launching a Shopify channel, for example, versus launching an international marketplace. I may be going into Canada, Mexico is the easiest one under the unified login with Amazon, or European market. So which one, in your opinion, is higher value?
Again, it really comes down to the situation and the prospective buyer and what they're looking for. But what I would say is there's pros and cons to both. So I would say, let's take the defined buyer out of the equation. I would say if you are to expand through Amazon and move into Canada and the EU and Germany, far easier from a launch perspective, from getting it off the ground. You understand the system. Obviously, it's a new environment, but it's not all that different. That's going to increase the value. Period. If again, coming back to like what our driving principles are, if the EBITDA is there and the revenue growth is there, and we've achieved the goals that we've set out. Mm-hmm. On the other side, though, if you look to launch D2C, or D2C makes up 1% of your total sales, if you can take that to 10 or 15 or 20% of total revenue and maintain that value, then all of a sudden a few things happen. One, you're diversified, and so there's a degree of risk mitigation that you're not totally centralized in a single platform. We all know the fears and the things that can keep us up at night being Amazon sellers, and something could change, and we're fighting the good fight and trying to solve for a lot of these problems. When you have that degree of diversification, that adds, I would say, or helps to increase the prospective buyer pool for a couple of reasons. I'd say one, if someone was totally concentrated on Amazon, didn't have a D2C footprint at all, and they were like, I can run this business, it makes sense with my product portfolio, and now I can actually launch onto D2C because I have their processes, their SOPs, and how they're approaching it, and that becomes intrinsically valuable. So coming back to it, if you understand what your prospective buyer pool looks like, and I would say you feel confident that you can actually launch on D2C. If you're not there, I would say candidly, much harder to launch D2C and start with media, like real media buying strategies outside of Amazon and proper traffic and website optimization, conversion rate optimization. It's harder and more expensive, but you own the relationship with the customer long term, and so there's there's a higher valuation over the course of time in terms of what that business is worth. But if you're in the DTC camp and then you launch onto Amazon, I would say absolutely, if the product makes sense inside of the marketplace, go for it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is launching in other marketplaces within the Amazon ecosystem is not as much a diversification as launching your own D2C channel.
Again, it depends on the prospective buyer. Like, it depends on who is buying the brand. And what I'm saying is, if you can get it up and running and have that D2C, I'd say, I think it opens up the opportunity more. But that said, it could also have, like, if we look back to a couple of years ago, if you're, aggregators weren't interested in buying brands that had a D2C footprint. They just wanted to aggregate Amazon-focused businesses. And I still think that there are people and businesses with that mindset. So again, like everything I'm sharing, I just take it with a grain of salt, guys, because you really have to know who you're going to, potentially sell to.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, in launching your own website and then going through everything you mentioned, first of all, it comes with a startup cost where you have to get your website done, and then there is traffic, the cost of driving traffic to it. That's the next challenge, which is the most expensive. And then the conversion is another piece, because how is your checkout behaving, right? So what is your shopping cart abandonment rate? So usually those numbers are huge. And of course, that's where you are bleeding and you need to optimize. And I actually wrote a whole article about this. The online retail challenge comes with the upfront cost. Then you have to drive traffic. Then you have to make sure you're converting. Then if you do all those things, even if you have deep pockets, it's hard to do with limited budget, and you achieve it. Now you've got a fulfillment operation that you have to be in charge of, where your margins have to allow 3PL and things like that. I'm not obviously I'm not advocating against it by all means. I'm just saying these are the things
these are facts.
These
are facts.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would say if you're not ready for that leap and you don't have the capital to invest, and it's not an overnight success. That's why, coming back to the point here, like launching into a different marketplace, another Amazon marketplace, is always going to be the path of least resistance and the thing that you'll be able to scale up quickest with the biggest yield in the short term, typically. It really depends as well. Like, come back to it. If you're trying to hit become an 8-figure, 20% margin business, then these are the types of decisions you start to make and say, well, how big is the total addressable market? And if I really get my product strategy, my brand strategy right, and I know what the next 15 products are, and they're aligned with my audience is going to keep buying them, and I can increase the total lifetime customer value here, then building that owned list of customers where I can market and email them directly and bring them in through Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and do all these very strategic things to own that relationship, then it starts to become a very different animal. And coming right back to the start of our conversation here, I think the big shift and that everyone needs to be sort of absorbing in our conversation here today is that you need to be a real brand today in order to have the degrees of success that we've seen over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, where it's been an absolute buying frenzy, because multiples aren't going down once you start to hit, some of these larger numbers. They grow. That's typically how it works. And so if you can get through and figure your way through this journey on Amazon and D2C, a mixture of both, retail, wholesale, whatever it is, if you can get to these really meaningful numbers, then all of a sudden it's a totally different game that you're playing.
I want to introduce Cellcore to all my listeners. As you all know, it's essential to add another selling channel to Amazon. Even though Walmart is the natural addition, you need the know-how to hit the ground running. Cellcore is a Walmart approved agency for launching and scaling Amazon brands on Walmart and even getting you into Walmart stores. They manage over 400 brands and 100,000 products. They were kind enough to offer my listeners a free comprehensive audit and a $500 statement credit. Visit www.cellcord.co/legends and mention Amazon Legends to activate this offer. But do it quickly because this offer may not last long. www.cellcord.co/legends. So I have a question for you, Yoni. For someone who is listening to us and saying, okay, I'm going to do this, and they've got a good product, everything is ready to go, but they don't know how the market is going to receive the product, right? So that's the first challenge. So you may come up with an idea, do all the research, but you need that user feedback and see what the customers think about it. So I understand this again will come down to the investment. So I'm just saying, from not for investment purposes, but in your experience, knowing everything you know, what is a better way to start? Launch on Amazon first or launch on your website first so that you have direct relationship with the customers to get an idea about where your product stands in order to continue building it?
If this is a product that fits Amazon and D2C, so let's exclude like very high-end fashion, which typically doesn't do great on Amazon as an example category. Let's say that it fits both molds. I would be very inclined to say Amazon is going to be your safer bet and your better bet from a launch perspective for a multitude of reasons. I think one, the cost to acquire customers in general will be far lower, and your ability to get exposure and understand how people are interacting and purchasing, the feedback loop is much shorter. So I really think that Amazon is where I would go and test and launch. And as I have proof of concept, again, this is assuming that you don't have a large audience and a database and an email list, and you're not using the right tools, and you don't have that degree of experience and sophistication into your operation, then Amazon would be my personal choice.
Yeah. I mean, this because this is a conversation that I usually have with people who are looking to launch their product, and they say, oh, we want to own the relationship and we want to have our customers directly be able to respond. So that's why we're going to launch on our website. I say definitely not. I mean, totally in agreement with you. There's one other thing that I would add to this is Amazon actually provides services for you to collect customer feedback, where the costs are negligible. Like there's for those who don't know, I'm sure at this point, anybody who is on brand registry and have access to the Seller Central options on their menu, know that there is something called a Vine program that you pay $200 for, and then Amazon will go out and invite people to purchase your product for free, but they are supposed to be leaving feedback. So, and that's usually honest feedback. It's supposed to be. So, I mean, it's there just for you to get an idea about how your product is received by the market. So
I think like the way to look at it, like to your point here, is that the amount of money that you would have to invest if you're, let's say we're starting at the same, we don't have a whole brand equity behind us with all of the historic data and information around our exact ideal client profile, ICP, and all of that stuff. Launching on D2C means you're going to have to come up with, a whole variety of ad units and ad creative that are for, you might need to create content for TikTok and for Instagram and for Facebook that are all different modules. You're going to have to go through and actually understand the media buying strategy and how you can approach, effective remarketing. There's a lot of technical. And then what is your email onboarding sequence for that? And how am I testing that out? How am I approaching like pure marketing here? I think that the amount of time, the amount of variables that you're having to factor in, and the feedback loops, it's just, you're going to end up dumping a lot more money into it in general.
Right. Yeah, I mean, totally. There's so many. And, in my article, I say, look, let's assume you do all these things in the shortest possible amount of time with deep pockets, which nobody really has anyway, but let's assume you do. Then you're going to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of orders as a young operation. What kind of business do you want to be in? Do you want to be in fulfillment, or do you want to be in building your value, where your efforts are focused in one single area, ideally, or not too many anyway? And even if you're using a 3PL, that's not just, okay, I have a 3PL. No, you've got systems integrations, you've got returns, refunds, blah, blah, all these things are. So just be careful. These are, as you put it, the facts of life that one has to recognize and be prepared for. I have another question for you. This is another one that comes up from time to time. Say you are selling on Amazon and you're considering diversification, and you have your website on the other side, but you're not selling through it. Building a following based on your website presence and then driving people to it, but purely for the purposes of building a following and then leveraging that following to drive business to Amazon. What are your thoughts about that business model?
I would say that there's, again, definitely value in having interactions with your audience if you can do it in a meaningful way, that if you're tracking the ROI and what it means, I think that there's definitely an argument to be made. I know that Amazon came out with a couple of years ago now the ability to have the badge where it's buy with Prime, and it just plugs in. So I think that there's value in that. I think that it also comes to like the strategies, again, that you're employing for your brand and your business. And just to give you like an example, thinking on my feet here, if you were to build a really high value SEO strategy that's focused on what it is you're trying to achieve here, I think for you to have that ownership and be driving all the value to your website and then distributing it to Amazon, it gives you a whole lot of power all of a sudden. Having the influencers that you might deputize to then work with your brand to drive traffic, building that following, it just gives you an asset that becomes intrinsically valuable for you to dictate what it is you want to do with it. And, I'll say I came into the world of Amazon and grew an Amazon brand on the back of having more, pure marketing, online marketing experience for 10 years. And I'd entered the Amazon space thinking that Amazon was a really good marketing tool, but I want to build D2C. And I learned, at least back then, this was sort of 2018, that you couldn't get the conversions, especially back then. You couldn't hit the numbers that you would hit in the same time frame, and it would take years and years and years of work to have something even remotely comparable back then. So coming back to it, I think that having a really strong marketing presence is always going to be valuable if you are able to track and convert and make sense of how you build that brand. But just going into it knowing that it is time investment, it is financial investment, and it is something that I would believe it's about the long game in those types of instances. Whereas with Amazon, you can get away with a lot more, a lot quicker, and likely achieve quicker success. And, who's to say not, that it won't be the same degree of success.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Amazon has taken away, and I remember when I was a seller, we also had our website, and the biggest problem was the shopping cart behavior. In terms of consumer behavior as well as technical, because things break, things don't show up, and different scenarios, there's international customers and then repeat customers, and what information you want to show bells and whistles and blah, blah. So all those things contribute to your conversion. Ultimately, it's my favorite word always. I talk about conversion. Conversion is the magic bullet that is the cure to all illnesses. And achieving a high conversion rate on Amazon is far easier than achieving a high conversion on your website. Yoni, I want to move on to the operations and general business knowledge, because I think they go hand in hand. So let's discuss what is important for businesses or those who are looking to build a company that is of value. What are some things that matter?
Yeah, so if we look at operations first, it would be having clarity on your inventory management approach and your supply chain and logistics. How do you optimize that process and make sure that financially it's as efficient as possible, but also when we talk about prospective buyers, that it's a really seamless experience. So, narrowing to key suppliers as opposed to having 50 different suppliers that, and I'm not talking about eliminating backup suppliers and having that degree of security. I'm talking about like you have, one of the things that we used to sell, we had a couple of really great products. It was grow your own bonsai trees, but one of our products had 17 different suppliers, these candle making kits, and no one wants to touch a product like that. If you can't consolidate that to 3, 4, 5 suppliers, then you're not working hard enough to find things that are actually more streamlined and interesting for a prospective buyer, or something that's much more palatable to acquire. So other operational things would be I would say those things that relate to that supplier management. So having that diversification from a security standpoint, but having real clear improvements and goals around, also things like what are the SKUs that make sense, and removing non-performing SKUs. Too many business owners sit on things that maybe if I gave it a little bit more love and attention, it could, if you're not going to give it that love and attention, it's not going to get there. So I would say those are some of the things that we would look at from operations, again, off the top of my head here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of numbers game here. So operations really, and at the end of the day, you said it right at the beginning, you can't make progress in an area you can't measure. So operations seem to be all about numbers. And you brought up the subject of inventory management. A lot of people, they just, obviously they look at Seller Central, they see how many pieces they have, but there's no real tracking of how many pieces they have in stock, how many pieces are already in the pipeline on a PO, and how many pieces at Amazon, and then what is their sell-through rate, how it all comes together. I don't really see people making that a priority over and over. And my favorite question is, take your net profit you generated in a month, compare that to the amount of inventory, the value of the inventory you had at the beginning of that month. What is the percentage, right? So they carry, that's ultimately is where the money runs out. Because if you are not managing this and you are stocking up too much, or sales are slowing down and you keep buying, that's where the disasters occur, right?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, people are buying businesses because there's an opportunity, unless you're trying to buy distressed assets, which is not the game that we're in, and not the game that we're trying, these aren't the brands what we're trying to sell. Your profit margin at the end of the day is really everything when you come to this moment in time. To be very clear, if you're building toward a goal, for right now, for me in my business, I don't care is the wrong word here, but I'm less cautious of how profitable we are, because we're in real growth mode across the group of businesses that I'm running here. And to sit there and have stacks of cash in the bank, it's actually wasteful, because I want to grow this thing and I want to actually see it's wasted investment. So I'm just saying, being very intentional about what it is you're trying to achieve at that moment in time. And exit is very much about those margins. It's a really critical point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was on a podcast myself the other day, and then they asked me a question. They said, what's the most important thing for a seller to look out for? And I said, it's kind of something similar to what you just said. I said, I don't care about top line. I don't care about EBITDA, how much net profit they're making. I don't care about conversion rates. What I care about is how healthy is the operation. And that means cash. And the way I measure it is just the way I described a minute ago. Take how much net profit you made in a month, and then compare that to what was the total value of the inventory you were carrying at the beginning of the month. If it's a small percentage, that means you're not going to see a penny of that net profit for X number of months. So that means you are going to be in a cash crunch all the time. And I say to people, you ever find yourself, I don't understand, we're growing all the time, we're making money, but we never have a penny in the bank. Why is that? If you are asking that question, you're not managing your inventory right, your inventory management is not in the right place. And ultimately, this can be disastrous. And of course, the real deadly piece of this is how much of that inventory you had at the beginning of the month is actually stale, that doesn't sell, which is what you touched on, right? If something is not performing, kill it, right, Yoni?
Definitely. I agree with you there. I would say that definitely, not to scare everyone off, it is more costly to grow as an e-commerce business grows, so too does that demand on your inventory. So, just being realistic as well with the model that it is, you can be having a really great growing business, and things that you would then start to dive into is what are my terms with my suppliers? If I'm at this size and this volume, am I getting economies of scale? Am I getting better terms? Can I have an extent? There's a lot of different levers that you can pull to find the right outcome, so that you're not under that sort of cash crunch all the time. But to your point, if all those things are in a good place, there's no reason you should be really asking yourself the hard questions, like Nick very clearly pointed out, in what's going wrong here.
Yeah, exactly. And again, as you put it very nicely at the beginning, facts of life, right? So this is it. If everything is working nice, that doesn't mean that you'll have an easy ride. You still have this cash situation, because everything going right means people are selling, sales are increasing, which means you have to carry more inventory, which means placing more POs, paying upfront a per percentage of it. So the never-ending story. Okay, so bottom line, what I'm taking away from this, as far as the chapter, so to speak, on operations and general business, it's really numbers. It's identify those numbers that are important to you, and then make sure that you are on top of them. About general business knowledge, let's talk a little bit about team. So what is, again, understanding what is the preferred kind of investment, but also as a matter of facts of life, full-time employees versus contractors, offshore. What is more favorable? What is your personal?
Yeah. This fits into that last category, business management, in terms of this roadmap that we like to work through. Your question specifically, again, it's always going to depend on the business and how they operate. Full transparency, one of my companies is an offshore staffing business out of the Philippines, and I'm personally a huge believer in the geo arbitrage play. I think that there's really great talent that are going to cost you significantly less in other geographies. You're not going to be able to, in my experience, build every single role that you would want to have fit in your company. But I have over 100 people full-time in my group of businesses working for our business. And 95% of them would be Filipino. So I would say that building the right processes, systems, accountability charts, and having very clear metrics across your business is what actually allows you to create much higher degree of effectivity in working with high value, low cost talent. So it comes down to your degree of maturity as an operator and experience. But if you get that right and you have the right SOPs, and I'm not talking about, I'm not for us, like I'm not talking about VAs that do data entry and scraping and all of that nonsense. I'm talking about like dedicated client success managers and middle management and a head of a director of client engagement and operations managers and project managers and creative directors and designers. Like I'm talking about serious roles. Everything that we do, all of our stuff is Filipino powered. But the reason why we're able to do that is because we're building clear accountability and organizational charts and running on methodologies like the entrepreneurial operating EOS that enable us to run with people in all regions and geographies. So just coming back to it, like my preference is I want to push the envelope as far as I can to pay the least that I can, and we pay. I'm paying fair wages here. I think our team are probably some of the most well-paid people in the Philippines, but it's still a far cry from what it would cost me to hire someone here in Israel or in the US, especially when you start to bring on like the very heavy taxes that you pay here on top of all of that, and the compliance components that go into working with local geographies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's a challenge building a business and hiring locally, even though we want to do that as much as possible. It's just as a price tag, and you just have to sit down and calculate. It's like just like any other investment you're making. One thing that I heard you say is having clear guidelines, SOPs. Those are things that you must say. In other words, you can't just be expected to go hire somebody and then leave them alone and then just tell them what to do every now and then. It's not really the way to do it. You need to have defined ways of training them, bringing them up to speed, monitoring their performance, as well as collaborating with them with the online tools, and so that where their time is spent.
And for local talent too, like having your four R's around your job description, having very clear KPIs and metrics that align with your business objectives, giving them correct feedback loops and understanding, am I on track? Am I not on track? Like I think, and this is my point here, is that having those structures, whether you're locally based or working remotely, especially in the current environment where most people are remote, which becomes another interesting layer about like local talent versus remote. Like now, what's the big value difference if everyone's working remote? If you can find talent that's at that capability, but that's probably a whole nother podcast and discussion. But to that point, I think that those are the things that help get your business into a really healthy position. And these are all the things that we talk about in the business management component of it, having the right hiring roadmap, having the right process improvement plans and all of your processes documented, having that org strategy accounted for, legal, tax, compliance, having your accounting, at the right, gap. Everything needs to be really buttoned down in this function of this roadmap.
So obviously, these are all things that add to the value of the company you're building, right? So lack of it also at the same time impacts the same way, the value.
Absolutely. I mean, we see through our consulting practice and how we even got into South Cole is that the buyer pool expands when you have very clearly documented SOPs, and the multiple often goes up as a result of it because there's more people bidding on it. A perceived buyer can walk into the business the same day and know how to do absolutely every aspect of it. So of course it's going to add more value. If you have your accountability chart with everyone's key performance, everyone becomes switch in, switch out when you put those two things together. So I can literally lose, hopefully not, but I could lose half my team tomorrow. And all of a sudden I know what the role I'm hiring for. I need to bring that person in. They understand what they need to do. Onboarding is accounted for, it reduces my time in the business. And, it becomes plug and play would be probably a little bit too far a stretch. And it's not exactly at that level, but it becomes way more digestible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I can speak from experience that the first time I started outsourcing to offshore people, I had nothing, and by the way, the best way to build all those materials and the procedures and everything is by simply documenting as you do it, right? It's not like homework. Okay, I'm gonna go do this now, and then, but as you bring people on and just take the time and document everything, record the training videos or whatever, as you're training them, record the videos and then write up the procedures. We've got a couple of episodes talking about how to build that infrastructure. So it's a world of its own. So it has a lot of.
I mean, yeah, I've got 40 full-time management consultants in Escala, our process improvement practice, and that's what we do. Is we go into businesses and we build, Fortune 500 level SOPs for businesses. Like I'm saying, if you wanted to do an episode on that, it's a whole other episode in our methodology and how we approach it and how you can do it at home.
Yeah, but I think definitely it's a good idea. Well, Yoni, as we dig into the business practices and where things can be done, and we can go on for hours, but obviously our time is going to run out. So thank you for this conversation. It's most valuable. We probably will need to do, we'll have a discussion, and we may like map out a few episodes to cover different areas so we can get into it. So let's get to know you a little bit. So tell us about Yoni, who Yoni is. Start with where you grew up and your early life experience is what I'm curious about.
Yeah. This is the therapy session, right? This is the
therapy session, my favorite.
I've needed a therapy session all week, so this is coming at a great time. Thanks, Nick. So I hope my accent still comes through. I grew up in Australia. I'm Australian born and have an Israeli father, an Australian mother. And yeah, that was my early life. Well, until I was 27. So still at this point, still the majority of my life, or 2/3 of it at least, was spent in Australia.
So what's it like growing up in Australia? Is it like running around and playing games with kangaroos and having boxing match with those kangaroos? So what is that like?
Yeah, that was my childhood. I had a kangaroo in the backyard. We used to box a couple times a week, and Joey, his name was. No, I grew up in the city. I grew up in Melbourne. It's 4 million, population of 4 million in Melbourne. And I would say, I've lived in Tel Aviv, I've lived in Los Angeles. So I've got a little bit of perspective now in terms of the differences. Listen, it was, somewhat suburbia, just on the edge of the city. It's a big city. There's a lot of activity. It's very exciting place. And I think culturally, I am Australian, and it's definitely the culture that feels that it's very laid back. Obviously there's a degree of seriousness, but I don't think anyone takes themselves too seriously. And I think that is something that, the rest of the world can learn, particularly Americans can learn from the Aussie culture.
Well, yeah, it's the environment is very important. So, you and I had a couple of discussions about how the environment affects people's psyche. So growing up, when was the first time you realized you had interest in business, money, or selling something? I've heard all kinds of things that motivate people to do this at a very young age.
Yeah, I wasn't one of those guys or girls for that matter. I wasn't one of those people that, I can say at 3 years old, I was selling my pencils to the kid next door to me. Like that wasn't me. I was always very curious in nature. And I think that Probably it started for me when I started making my first, my first real money, when I was in college. And on the back of that experience, I think, I had a bit of exposure, and I actually fell in love with marketing, with digital marketing. That was something that I felt really passionate about. So yeah, I would say that I was working as a recruiter. It was my first job out of college, and there was probably 15 other businesses in this somewhat co-working incubator space. And I saw these guys building websites like old school. This is going back to sort of 2008, maybe. And yeah, just would walk past and gravitate toward the whole experience. And I left a paying job to take an unpaid internship and start working at a digital agency. I just really had a passion for it.
So this was an incubator that where other people trying to build businesses, and that's where you interned?
I interned at an agency in Australia. I was paid at this recruitment firm that was partly owned by, it wasn't a conglomerate, it was a couple of guys who had invested in sort of 20 different businesses. So they just brought all of the businesses into one office space back then.
Well, did they have a hands-on or hands-off approach?
They were very hands-on. They were very hands-on as a business, yeah.
So, and you were working in one of the companies that was in that kind, the agency.
I was working at a recruitment company in that environment, and ultimately left to go for a completely unrelated business and took an unpaid internship just so that I could get exposure into working in the field.
I see. So what I'm curious about is when you worked in that recruitment work under this conglomerate that had this incubation, what was that like? Because this is like very early in your
Hated it.
What was it like seeing these startups, young companies being taken on and being supported?
You know what? It was an exciting environment as a general. I hated what I was doing for work and the company that I was working in and the environment that was created for me in this sort of microcosm. But to see like a beverage company, and to see an agency, and to see all these other companies, a couple of technology companies, that was pretty exciting. That was something that, again, like if I hadn't have had that exposure and seen what other people were working on, I don't know that I would have found my feet as quickly as I did into an industry that, I've really gravitated toward for for at least 15 years now.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that kind of an environment is something that motivated you, and then you found your real interest area of digital marketing, and then that's where you specialize, right?
Yeah, that was for about 10 years I was doing everything from web design to content production, TV commercials, UX UI work, photography, for, like you called out at the start, Sony and MasterCard, Mercedes-Benz, Medtronic. I was the largest Facebook media buyer for a couple of years there in Australia, and, did some massive things. When I moved to Los Angeles and worked with some of those companies that I mentioned in the space. And it was, very, very exciting and a lot of fun, but, really, really important stepping stones.
Yeah. So are you telling me growing up as a kid, these are the kinds of things that right now really gets you excited and you love doing? There was no connection, like there was no, the seeds being planted somewhat?
Do you know what? It's hard to say. Like, I studied architecture and dropped out after about a year and a half. Like I would say, like, I really loved everything that was creative and design, and that was like the thing that I liked. And then after dropping out, I went into marketing and management. I would say like the continuous thread or trend throughout my career is like having that ability to have creativity and think through big vision and see how that can be brought into reality has definitely been something like the whole, that whole 10 years or so was coming up with concepts, big ideas and concepts, and then actually working through and managing client expectations and the projects and bringing them from idea to life. So I would say that would be the therapy that you're unlocking for me right now.
Well, so the creativity is what appeals to you. But Yoni, I picked up something else in this conversation, that initial environment of that incubator environment where different ideas, different people working in different things is what you are doing right now yourself.
For sure.
And of course, every one of those people, they are creating something, right? So they're creating either a product or they all have dreams. Now, nobody goes into an incubator just to sell groceries to make money, right? So they're all chasing after a dream. So that's what you wrapped yourself in. And what is admirable to me is you created exactly that as your business environment. So people always come back to their roots, I guess.
I think, I think that's definitely something that I never even considered up until this very conversation right now. But yeah, in hindsight, it's coming back to the roots and maybe some of the things that I saw, when I was in my, early 20s.
Yeah, well, that's what comes out of the therapy session.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
It's because it's we are too close to the subject matter and we don't really know why we do what we do. And when somebody who has nothing to do with it sees and hears and clearly it's a different way. This is great. So Yoni, tell us, how can people reach you and share your contact information with us?
I'm very active on LinkedIn of all the social platforms. Yoni Kosminski is where you'll find me, or my name, Yoni, at any one of our brands, businesses that we own, Multiply Me, MII, southcole.co, or we are Escala.
Great. And we'll obviously have your contact information with your episode. So anybody wants to reach out, feel free. And Yoni is a great guy, as you heard, very knowledgeable. So I'm sure that he'll return valuable answers for your business. So thank you, Yoni. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It was great.
Before I wrap up, I want to remind everyone to visit www.cellcore.co/legends and mention Amazon Legends to get a free comprehensive audit and a $500 statement credit. It's time to conquer Walmart with Cellcore by your side. Thank you. And this brings us to the end of another episode, and I'll see you on the next one.
If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the episode, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too.